he designed one to the normal Anglican path. You've been into many of the city churches, they're very much the same. What you can see is what the Victorians did to it. That's what's happened. There's a lot of the decoration was added to the but so basically, what they did in 1891, they found there were weaknesses in the building, so they then did some major repairs, using concrete and steel bars and things down in the basement to hold the building up. That's what they did. And then they beautified it, and you've got all this modern marble stuff. And the original church had different pews. When Wesley had it built, the pews were in two halves, men on one side, women on the other, which was added in those days. And not at the back. At the back, people stood on the centre, which you could get 1,000 people into the chapel in those days. Nowadays, we do that 16. It is safe to go out just 16 people. And so they put in these pews, what some people refer to as his confirmation, and that represents John telling his brother Charles about the experience. And the window on the left is Wesley's response to when he was told by the church authorities, because it was the name, go and get a parish, Mr. Wesley. And he said, the world is my parish. And whenever he was challenged by people, he said, the world's my parish. It's open to me where I preach. And that window shows Wesley with different nations. Right. At this point, I shall be facing the in the centre here, and then they decided to remove them and turn this into a sanctuary for the community service. Another place. This is part of a children's thing which happens sometimes, which I do encourage children to come in, hence that. The rail that you can see, lady there is looking just where I want to look, point it out. You've got a brass plate which tells you, yes, it was paid for by Margaret Thatcher. Margaret Thatcher gave this when the work was being done as a gift. She was married in this church, and her twins were baptised in this church, because she comes from a Methodist background. So, hence that. But as I say, it's used for all sorts of things these days. You will also notice that we seem to have a lot of flags. These flags make their appearance. It started when the Olympics was here. They decided to put flags out. But the flags represent all the different nations that are in the congregation. So there's a fair collection that are here. And every so often somebody gets enthusiastic and puts them out again. So why they're out now, I don't know. But they appear to disappear from time to time. And it's here where you can see we do have an organ. The organ concert is down here. It's at the moment undergoing a major overhaul. It hasn't been overhauled for over 50 years. And they spend thousands on repairing it. So we're waiting to see what finished. And it's a very grand building. And his brother Charles, who wrote all those hymns. Thomas Cook was one of the leaders of the church in Wesley's time and afterwards. And he founded really missionary movements. That was his. That's why he's there. William de la Flechère is really John Fletcher. William John Fletcher. He was French-Swiss by birth, and he was a priest in Madeley in Shropshire. And Wesley was training him up to become his successor. but sadly he died first, so he never did. And it was his church in Madeley that gave the font, which I was pointing out just now. That font came from there. It's in his memory. Joseph Benson and Adam Clark were just notable Methodists. Clark was minister here. I know almost nothing about Benson, so I won't bore you. What they did in the Victorian times was to redo the back. We have no pictures, nothing of that kind, but you have scripture, you have commandments, and they were redone in Victorian times. So they're not the original. But the woodwork and everything else is original. You've got what looks like an altar, but it is not an altar. I make the point. It is a table. And originally, when it was put there, it was just a table. But the front, with the carving on it, was added about 40 years ago. Mm-hmm. So it's an addition to it. And it makes it look more altar-like. But it is the table. It was given by the church in the Isle of Man. That's why it's got those Celtic crosses on it, and so on. And this communion area was where communion was taken. But it was realised that this was too small. The congregation was larger, of course, in the past, but even today, the congregation is 400 plus. And if you have a communion service, it would take a long while. So they redid it. And if you walk on, we'll see what they did.
Technology-wise, I'm not sure, but
Gentleman over there is looking into one of the rooms. You can see they're not very big, they're even smaller than this. So that was, the house has been restored as near as possible to what it was like in John Wesley's day. They took out Victorian things, they changed the paintwork, so it is as near as possible. Apart from all this plastic, that's the rest is more or less as it was. Original dresser and so on and so forth. Not, ladies, a very practical kitchen. You would have noticed there is no stove. They had to cook on the open fire. There's an open fire which is there. Also, there is no sink because the house has no water. There was a well on the far side of the site, and we believe the water was brought up. And Wesley in this house had a housemaid and a cook, and between them they did the work. Normally the job of running the house was given to the wife of the minister, because there were always two ministers in this house. There was John Wesley himself, but as he was travelling between March and October all over this country, somebody had to be in charge, so there was a second minister here on site. And that has been the case up until now. We have an interregnum at the moment, and a new minister starts in September.
He didn't have a wife then, John Wesley?
No, John Wesley had a wife. No. Well, he did, but she was never here. I will tell you the saga of John Wesley's wife when we get upstairs. So here is as I say, the kitchen. When Wesley died in 1791, other ministers came and lived here. But the house was always full of people. Wesley kept a very tight grip on his ministers and his preachers. And the top two floors contained guest rooms for visiting ministers. And they would come, they were in London, and stay here. And they would all live together communally in this house. It wasn't just John Wesley's house. After his death, 100 years, ministers came and went. And then they decided in 1891, which was the big year of change, to turn part of it into a museum. So they knocked the hole in the wall you just walked through. They knocked the hole in the wall there and established the first museum where there are some artefacts largely relating to John Wesley. The main museum is about Methodism and Wesley in general. This is specific. A lot of the money for the work done here was paid for by Frank Salisbury, who was a noted artist, and I'll talk about him in a minute. And so in there you can have a shuffle round and look at the things that are there, and I'll tell you what's in the case.
When he travelled, did he stay with ministers?
Sorry?
When he travelled around the country, did he stay with ministers?
He largely got as he became better and better known, people going to love God so well. They say a lot of things all the time. In the central case, you've got what are claimed to be some of his clothes. We're a bit suspicious about some of them. The trouble is, people said, "This is Mr. Wesley's nightcap." Is it heck? So you can't be sure. But the coat which is there to look like a preaching outfit is genuinely his. It's a house coat. You will feel you've got coats on, I haven't. This is always a cold house. And we've got background heating in here. I wouldn't think so, but we have. But it's a very cold house. And Wesley didn't want to waste money on coal, and he told people, put more clothes on.
But he was away a lot, wasn't he?
He was away. No, he wasn't. He was here in the winter. Because the conditions were bad and roads were awful. He tended to be here between October, November and March. And then he set up here. That was his time. What you've got of interest here are his shoes. They are genuinely shoes. And he was a very small man. I'm told that's a size 4.5, 5. So it's very small feet he's got. And also, if you look at them, they're identical. They didn't have right and left shoes. Yes.
He did the same.
Yes. When we get to the kitchen upstairs, I'll tell you about Charles. You've got his travelling box in which there are these mythical knickknacks that are said to be his. What's of interest is his travelling communion. Ministers still today, when you have sick and elderly folks and you want to take communion, you need a set to take with you. And here is Wesley's ones, which are in a little leather case. Wesley was a very impatient man. They reckon he travelled about 12,000 miles a year on horseback. Wow. And when he got elderly, he decided to go by coach. And that's the length of the coach. But as I said, he was impatient. He hated waste of time. So when he was on horseback, he would read. The old horse trotted along, following the path. Why not? I mean, we have to hold on to the steering wheel now. But he let the horse go on, and he read. And when he was in the coach, that was the lamp he used to give him light. Round the back on the other side, you've got a little writing stone, which is the one he took with him on his journeys. Not a nice mahogany one like you see on the antiques program, but a pine one stained. But it's a functional book. It's a functional book. And there are 3 examples of his letters here, so you can see. Well, you can read. The top one is about legible to me, but the others I can't read at all. My eyes are not good enough, and they fade. Finally, as I say, before you do the move round, in the case over here is the family case. There is a christening robe. His father was the Reverend Samuel Wesley, and the Reverend Samuel, Church of England priest at Epworth in Lincolnshire, and that is the family's christening robe. Samuel and his wife Susanna had 19 children. Sadly, only 10 survived to adulthood. Some were, a couple were stillborn, some died within a month or two. typical of the 18th century. That's the road that Father Christie. Beside it is a little silver wrapper with bells on it, which is lovely. If you've seen the film, you would have heard about the great teapot. Here is the teapot. It's a gallon. I suggest you move that way around. That way you'll get back.
I have a
Sorry.
it's made on a top shape of
That's why there's no light down here.
It seems that's because of an American cow. The cow too.
Oh.
It's bigger than an American cow. Unbelievable.
As you come round on this side where I'm standing, you'll see just on my side, there is a portrait here. This is a very famous portrait of John Wesley, but it's not from life. It was painted as long ago as 1930. Frank Salisbury was the artist I referred to. He was a very successful painter. He painted American presidents, kings, royalty, you name it, he painted it. And he painted the official pictures of George VI's coronation. And he painted Wesley because he was a Methodist. And there it is. And it's based on what he'd seen and on the death mask of Wesley, which is in the museum, and also on all these, you can't see them. Over here in this cupboard are a lot of shelf ornaments of John Wesley. After Queen Victoria, Wesley was the most commonly potted, if I can use the word, person in the 19th century. We've got all these. We've got well over 100. This is just a sample. In the other building, there's a cupboard absolutely chock full of all sorts of Wesley memorabilia. Go away, or there's nothing on the door. I'll have to go and answer that. When you see it, you can't join it. You can try.
What the death mask was at, like Alaska. Maybe there's like fingers. Which one's the real one? Which one's the
Right, if I can squeeze in past you. Wesley had a cook housekeeper. Brought the meals for Wesley and his guests, all brought up here and put on a dresser. There would have been a dresser. That recess was designed to take a large dresser, and that's where there would have been plates, cups, saucers, and all the other knickknacks there, and the food on the table to help yourself. Get your food, sit down and eat your meal. The furniture is of the period it wasn't. It isn't Wesley furniture. What happened was, because other ministers lived here after his death, they brought their own furniture. So the furniture got dispersed. And what has happened over the years is they've tried to buy back as much as they can. And there is some in the house, but not down here. Somebody asked about Charles Wesley. There's Charles. There's a nice portrait of Charles Wesley. This is where Methodism begins. the film, I think, does make the point. It was Charles Wesley who called his friends together at Oxford to read the Bible, say their prayers, talk about what they believe, visit the poor and so on. Charles. Charles has a description, his biography is called Charles Wesley, a man born for friendship. That was very much his character. He had that sort of personality. John, on the other hand, was Big Brother. And when he joined the group of students, because he was a university lecturer, a fellow of Lincoln College, he established his authority over them, in a sense, because he was a very skilled organiser. So it's the Big Brother thing that you get. This is the man that I warmed to. He wrote the finest hymns in the English. Everybody knows at least one, if it has to be, Hark the Herald Angels Sing, so be it. But in many cases, Love Divine or Love's Excelling is a hymn that a lot of people know. But the Methodists are very much associated with hymn singing. The average non-Methodist describes a Methodist service as a hymn sandwich. So that you have your prayers and things in between the hymns. And also, if you're a Methodist like me and you watch songs of praise, you shout at the screen, you're singing the wrong tune. Because that's something we associate with particular hymns. Really, with Charles Wesley, brothers are different. John was very upright, very fond of the ladies was John, very friendly. Charles was just the warmth of personality, but he was very formal. He dressed as a Church of England priest. He wore the funny wig with the headphones that you've got there. And he said, I live and die in Anglican. And when he died, he wouldn't be buried here. He's buried in his parish church in just off Baker Street. That's where he's buried. I look at this picture, it's got the eyes that look at you. As I stand here and look at him, I think he's about to smile. There's something in the way the artist has captured the face. I think it's about to smile. One other thing to show you is piston in the corner. This is a chamber. It's one that we're not allowed to touch or do anything to. But John believed that horse riding was the best exercise that you could take. So when the weather was bad, you have to do your horse riding indoors. So you need a chamber horse, and it's sprung. You sit on the side, I'm not allowed to do, and hold the handle and you jig up and down and simulate riding a horse. Well, we all laugh. But you can, my daughters go to the gym. You know, they ride bicycles, walk and row and do all these things. So training a horse is nothing strange. Chain horse there. If you'd like to go through into the next room, that's the sitting room.
No, I wanted to see that. Oh, right. That was not what I thought it was going to look like. I never couldn't see it from where I was.
I think that's Watts.
Okay. And in the churchyard before we came here,
Yeah.
and there was a memorial to a hymn writer called Hart, I think it said.
Is where was that?
In Bunhill.
In Buckingham, Dungeon.
Yeah.
Not a name I know.
Okay.
North American Indians.
Now you're even more conscious
Oh, wow.
of how small this element is. What they did in this room is to restore the original painting and also to replace the wallpaper. A lot of scraping away took place all those years ago, and this is the sort of paper that was on the walls in the 80s, not in the 80s. Every space he wanted to use, the chimney space in there, behind those cupboards, got books in. The silk or whatever it is, got the dirty over the years. But that's what it is. They draw everything fitted in. The two things that are referred to generally are Charles. Behind the ladies you've got Charles' bureau. Nice big angular. They're not very simple. And the chair over there, and I like this is where Charles would have sat and written nearly 6,000 hymns. Some of them are really, really very good. And some of the wording is not stitching out here. There's Leslie's desk. I don't really even notice. We've got tiny little things here. These, no, that one. That's a candle tray. You put your candlestick here, and the
Go and
mirror.
have a look.
That's
If you don't close it up, you won't see it.
so we've got this candle tray on this desk. Behind you on the wall is the portrait of John Wesley as an old man. You notice, I didn't point this out on Charles's picture, the long straight nose is a family feature. It's on all of them. And that's his own hair. He believed that the wearing of wigs was vanity. So he grew his hair long. But I do notice it's curled at the end.
Is that all vanity?
The disappointment about Wesley is his sermons were bestsellers. Oh, they were bestsellers. But when you read the sermon, you don't get excited because you haven't got the stories and the illustrations that he used to get his point across. And that's the sad fact. He hasn't got any recordings of it. So you don't really know. But he must have been a very effective preacher. Otherwise he would never have attracted the thousands who came to hear him. Right, let us climb the first set of stairs. Now we've got carpets, so we're in the posh bit now.
You can do the rest like that.
Where do you guys come from?
We're from North Carolina.
North Carolina.
Yes. And they're attached to that lake.
Hello, Peter, it's Alan. We had a family, parents and a small boy, who wanted to go in the house, and I couldn't let him, and I got too many. If you can get Jill to look after you, I think we'd try and fit him in something. All right, well, that's fine. Okay, he's upstairs. Okay. Right, this is John Wesley's study. The two rooms on this floor were the rooms that were exclusively his. And here we are in his study where he would have spent a lot of his time. And some of the furniture is genuinely his. This is his bureau. Slightly better version than the one that is downstairs for Charles. You've still got the candle trays. And it says on here, John Wesley's bureau with secret drawers. Well, it's not a great secret. These drawers here only go back about 2/3 of the journey. Behind it, there's an empty space. but it's all sealed in. You can't get at it. The only way you can get at it is to take the side drawer out and then reach round the back. Wesley used that to store money, so that he had access to money. There's no safe otherwise. Also, sorry about this. Ignore that. This is where I satisfy somebody's curiosity who asked me about his wife. I'll tell you the story of his wife. When he married, when he and Molly were both in their middle 40s, they should never have married. They were not really compatible. The story behind it is this. It was in the winter, and John had been to preach in South London, just across London Bridge. And walking back, the pavements were very icy, and he slipped and fell, damaged his ankle. His doctor said, "Mr. Wesley, you must rest. None of this going in preaching. Stay in, rest." And Molly Vazale was a member of the congregation at his church, and when he was living at the Foundry, before this house was built. And Molly said, "I am a widow, I've got a house in London, in Threadneedle Street, near the Bank of England. I have servants, we can look after you, come and stay with us." So he went and stayed with Molly, and she nursed him through while he rested. And they took up a conversation, and then they wrote letters, they became romantic. As I said to you when we were downstairs, always had a feeling for the ladies, did John. And they decided to marry. But here comes the story. The trouble was, Molly wanted him to become a typical Anglican priest. Get yourself a parish so that I can live the life of the vicar's wife. It's not quite Jane Austen, but it's nearly the Jane Austen. It's 50 years before Jane Austen. And he said, no, my mission is to go out and preach all over England, and I'm going. And she said, "All right then, I'll come with you." So she went. She hated the journeys. The coach was uncomfortable. Places where they often stayed. If they'd stayed with houses, it was okay. If it was an inn, it wasn't. Molly said, "No, I'm not doing this. It's not on." So John said, "Well, sorry, I'm going to carry on with my preaching." And he went. He stayed with different families. People heard he was famous, and people heard Mr. Wesley's in the district will offer him hospitality. So he went and stayed with family. And dare I say, the ladies didn't have much to do. They got servants to do all the work. They could sew, play the piano, read their books. That was it. And so they decided to write to Mr. Wesley. When keep up a correspondence. "Dear John," they wrote. "Yours affectionately," they wrote. And Molly said, "What's this? Here is my husband travelling around the country, visiting family, getting letters from ladies. I'll hide them in there." And that's where the letters went. But it caused friction in the marriage, and there are stories of rows between the two of them. It's there. But John Wesley is a human. He is very much a human person. And the marriage just foundered. They were together for about 6 years before the marriage folded, and Molly went back to her home. She had money. John refused to take her money. When people married in those days, money and property became the property of the husband automatically. But John said, "No, I do not want the money. I do not need the money." So she's had an income to live on, and they separated, and she died. She never lived here. She died before this house was built. So she lived to the Foundry with me. That's the story of John's unfortunate marriage. Here in this room, what have we got? We've got a clock. The clock in the corner is a clock made by a clockmaker called Claude Duchesne. Duchesne was a French Huguenot clockmaker. He had a clock somewhere where the Drury Lane Theatre is, somewhere in that part of London. And active in London between 1690 and 1720. So that's the period of the clock. And you will see that the clock is working. Yes, the clock is working. It keeps good time when they remember to wind it. It chimes nicely too. The only bit that doesn't work are the phases of the movement. That doesn't work, but the rest does. And as I say, it's a nice clock there. You've got a strange looking chair. This is a cockfighting chair. Cockfighting was the cruel sport of Georgian England, and you sit on it like you were riding a horse. Oh. This way round. Whoops. This way round, and you read. John had it converted into a study chair with an adjustable, very adjustable shelf to put your book on. There's a little drawer down there to put your papers in, somewhere to put your ink and your pens and things there. That's where he could study. What did he study? He studied the books at the back. Behind you at the back is John Wesley's library. It's a gentleman's library, all sorts of topics of interest to Wesley and others are there. Some of the books are in mint condition, they've been restored, some are pretty old and worn out. But we know they were his because, like many people, he scribbled in the margin, he underlined things he agreed and disagreed with. So that's his collection of books in a nice bookcase and so on. Finally, behind me is this strange looking object. This is an electric machine. John Wesley and the American scientist Benjamin Franklin were interested in electricity, and Franklin and Wesley were acquainted. And Wesley got Franklin to make this machine, have this machine made. It generates electricity. If you wind the handle, the friction 5 in the morning. And Wesley believed that everybody on their way to work should have the chance to hear the Bible read, say their prayers, and so on. And he insisted on the oath. If you happen to be a guest in this house, Wesley expected you to be there. There's a lovely story of Wesley rousting people out of bed who were unwilling to be there at 5 o'clock in the morning. The room behind me is the prayer room, and you'll see how you can shuffle in and see how tiny it is. Also in there, on the Bible, there's a slip of paper. The slip of paper is a service we hold in Methodism every January called the Covenant Service. People are forgetful, and you have to be reminded of what you promised. When you become a member of Methodist Church, you make certain promises, and every year the congregation is reminded of the promises they made. The Covenant Service is very much Methodist, but it's spread. I know Anglican churches that now hold the Covenant Service. It's a service which goes back to the Puritan time. It's an old, but it's very much the thing that Wesley did. Do have a nose in there, and I'll meet you out on the landing when you work and shuffle around.
I could. It's okay, but
It's also a
Can I just lay down on the prayer room?
It's amazing.
card from our covenant service. We had a couple. This was printed out for us in cards, and I got one on my fridge and one in my car.
That's great.
You got the English one?
Yes,
Oh,
from Wesley's.
How would you be able to read at 4 a.m.?
If you didn't have electricity.
Right?
Firelight?
Right, we're up here. These are the two guest rooms, one on each floor. This one at the moment is empty. It's a sort of storage place with all sorts of clutter. Over there you've got a very nice tall boy. Clothes were not hanging wardrobes. The wardrobes weren't in use. You put your clothes in there and you'll notice they've all got locks on them, so you don't trust people. So the top part is in two parts. It comes apart in the middle. The top part contains clothes, so underclothes at the top and so on, and overcoats at the bottom. And what's sticking out is a brushing tray. There being no sort of dry cleaning in those days. If your clothes get dirty, particularly with clay and mud, you put it on there, get a stiff brush, and you brush it. And so there, that's what the brushing tray is. The three drawers at the bottom of the thing, that's where the household linen is, all the blankets and sheets and all the rest of it. And that was Wesley's. That Jamie was his. The last thing to point out is, if you look out the window, have you recorded Daniel Field in your...
Yes, we walked around before we came here.
So you've done it? Oh, you could tell me that. No, I normally say to people, you have to remember that's what we call a dissenter's graveyard. If you are not Anglican, Methodist, Baptist, Congregationalist or whatever, you're technically a dissenter. You dissent with the threatened non-articles of the Church of England. And you've got to be buried somewhere. You can't be buried in the church because you're not an Anglican. So that's London. And there's something over 200,000 burials there. They've been shuffled about a bit over the centuries, but that's where they are. And you would have found the notables that are there. I should point out that when you're standing, you can see, you look through a white grave against a tree. Right in the middle distance, that's Susanna Wesley, that's Wesley's mother. She is there. And just on this side, of course, is John Bunyan, who is the best known. So Bunyan, and we mentioned here the green flat top tomb over there, on the right hand side, there, that's Isaac Watts, who wrote the hymn When I Survey the Wondrous World. Watts is credited as really the father of hymn writing in this country. It was his hymns that started it all off. He began by paraphrasing the Psalms and putting them into acceptable rhyming so that people could sing. So that's where Watts is ready. And you've got Jerusalem, William Blake. He's buried there. They're among the best known people who are buried over there. The last room to show you, the room next door, is simply left as a 19th century room. It's all the 19th century furniture that was in the house that was in the guest room there. So do have a look at that, and then wend your way downstairs.
Tell me, what Wesley was in the away from
It is I've been asked about when we ceased to be Anglicans. What happened was that America was growing as a colony, and the American church was growing, but there was a great shortage of clergy. When had been to America earlier on, and Methodists had gone to America. And Wesley went to the Bishop of London, whose responsibility was America, and said, "My Lord, there aren't enough priests in America, you must ordain some more." The bishop said, "No, Mr. Wesley, I will not. I will not ordain priests for rebels, simply because America had just got its independence." And he wasn't having any of that. And Wesley said, "My Lord, there's a spiritually, if you won't do it, I will." And the bishop said, "Mr. Wesley, that's illegal. You cannot ordain people. Only a bishop can ordain people." But Wesley did, and that from that point the Anglicans and the Methodists start to depart. It didn't actually happen until 4 years after Wesley's death. But it had gone so far, and Methodism was going down its own road, that they gave up.
And now we're here. You know, it's our fault.
That's why I mentioned it.
Where's John Wesley himself?
I'm going to show you.
Oh,
He's
okay,
very-
perfect.
it's the last part of our walk,
Lovely.
so brace yourselves. It's probably cold out there. No, he's not there. We're going to find our way down. But do look in the...
Do you do chicken back?
Yes. Jump on. Oh my
I'll
goodness.
put you in as a member of Help the Aged.
No, I'm good. I got it.
Yes, no, I don't do that.
Let's go back to the chapel, and then go back to the tomb, and then go back to the museum, and then go back to the house, and then go back to the chapel, and then go to the tomb again, and then go back to
I mean, there's not more for us, right? More
Your
history.
feet will be over the edge of that one.
Oh, wow.
It is. Very nice. You really see around here.
Stay with me for a bit.
Thank you so much.
Are you at the end?
Yes,
Oh, no.
a little bit more.
Are you at the end?
I thought you did.